Hello everyone, I hope you are all fine. Today we will present to you a new story entitled The Abandoned Hospital, so we will leave you with the story now. The old hospital had been abandoned for years. It stood tall and imposing on the edge of town, its windows boarded up and its doors locked tight. No one knew exactly what had happened inside those walls, but rumors abounded. People whispered about experiments gone wrong, about patients who had been left to die, about the doctors who had gone mad. Despite the stories, a group of teenagers dared each other to explore the abandoned hospital. They were bored, looking for something to do on a Saturday night, and the old hospital seemed like the perfect place to scare each other. They parked their cars outside the hospital gates and made their way inside, flashlights in hand. The air inside was stale and musty, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the dusty floors. They wandered through the empty corridors, peeking into rooms and searching for anything that might give them a thrill. But as they made their way deeper into the hospital, they began to feel a sense of unease. It started with small things, a flicker of movement in the corner of their eyes, a cold draft that seemed to come from nowhere. But soon, the fear became all-consuming. They felt as though they were being watched, as though something was lurking just out of sight. And then, they heard it, a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from all around them. They froze, their flashlights trembling in their hands, and listened as the moan grew louder and more insistent. They turned to run, but the doors that had been opened just moments before were now locked tight. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. As they huddled together, the moaning grew louder and more intense. They could feel the vibrations of it in the very air around them, and they knew without a doubt that they were not alone. And then, it began, the scratching and the scraping. It started softly, but quickly grew louder and more frenzied. The teenagers screamed as they realized that something was trying to break through the walls. They ran down the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. But the scratching and the scraping followed them, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. As they turned a corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of figures that seemed to be made of shadow and smoke. The figures were tall and gaunt, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. The teenagers froze, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. And then, the figures began to move, slowly at first, and then with a terrifying speed. The teenagers screamed as they were chased through the hospital by the shadow figures. They ran down staircases and through empty rooms, but no matter where they went, the figures were right behind them. Finally, they found themselves back at the entrance of the hospital. They pushed and pulled at the doors, desperate to escape, but they wouldn't budge. And then, the figures were upon them. The teenagers screamed as they were enveloped in darkness, their bodies writhing in pain as the shadow figures consumed them. When the police arrived at the old hospital the next morning, they found no trace of the teenagers. The doors were still locked tight, and the windows were still boarded up. But there was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling that something terrible had happened inside those walls. And as the years passed, people whispered about the old hospital and the horrors that lay within. They warned their children to stay away, and they never ventured near it themselves. For the old hospital was a place of darkness and fear, a place where the dead walked and the living were consumed by shadows.